All right, welcome to today's marker Q&A. It's raining out and I hope you all can hear me. We'll see how that goes. I hope the microphone tunes out the rain. If not, we'll have to redo it some other time. Okay, I've ordered our questions from what seems to me I've put them into an order that makes sense to me. So starting by the most straightforward one that is kind of an introductory question and going up into more detailed or complex or nerdy questions. Let's dive right in. Question number one, what is a marker cue? So a marker cue is any kind of stimulus that marks or highlights a specific behavioral moment. So in the dog training world, we are most familiar with the clicker. It can also be a verbal marker cue such as yes. And in marine mammal training, I think a whistle is commonly used as a auditory marker cue. We can also have visual marker cues, such as a thumbs up. And I believe also in marine mammal training, they also sometimes use certain shapes or signs to mark behavior. That is, for example, something you might want to do with a learner who is deaf. You could use a visual marker. And then finally, we have tactile marker cues. For example, I used to work with an Aussie who's both deaf and blind, and his marker cue was a tap on the nose. So the owner would do tap and then feed, just like you might click and feed. And so you could have tactile, visual, or auditory marker cues, whatever makes sense for you and your learner. And the most common in the dog training world is auditory, either a clicker or a verbal marker. And it serves the purpose of, as I said, highlighting a particular behavioral moment. So one metaphor that has been used to death, but I think it's a good one, is think of taking a snapshot of the perfect dog. So your dog does something and you love it. And if you wanted to take a snapshot with your camera, you would press the shutter the moment the dog is doing the thing in the most perfect way, or the moment the facial expression is perfect, or the moment the dog's butt hits the ground. So you can think of it as the shutter of a camera. You can also think of it as a highlighter you use to highlight, if you have a paragraph, right? And the paragraph is like all kinds of behaviors that are happening, and you use a highlighter, like a neon color, to highlight one word in that text that is the most important. And your learner receives this feedback, and once the learner is familiar with this marker cue, knows what it is that you particularly like about their behavior and what it is that you are after. It is typically followed by a tangible reinforcer. So that could be food, it could be toys. Depending on what learner you are working with, it could be anything that that learner enjoys, such as an opportunity to chase a rabbit, for example, or an opportunity to jump into the pool and swim. Number two, do you need marker cues? Well, no, you don't need marker cues. People have been training humans have been training dogs successfully for decades or even centuries without using marker cues. So no, you absolutely do not use marker cues. When dog sports first became a thing, there were also no marker cues commonly used yet. People were just using straightforward reinforcement and punishment, and the dogs also learned the behaviors. I do think that marker cues make the communication between you, the human, and your dog more subtle, more nuanced. And I think that is fun. Personally, as a trainer, I do not think it is absolutely necessary for any dog or any human to use any marker cue at all. I also think it does it comes in handy if you want precision behaviors. So for example, if you look at a video of an obedience trial in the 1950s, and then you look at a video of an obedience trial today, you will see that the picture that the handler and the dog are presenting has changed. And well, one thing is you see happier dogs these days. The training has become better, but also I think you get more precision. You see that if you look at the best of the best, that heel position, for example, is being held more precisely than it used to be in the old video. And for some trainers, not for all trainers, but some trainers get this beautiful picture by using specific marker cues. For example, Shade Weitzel's healing is beautiful for this. And she does teach her dogs where the perfect position is with the help of location-specific marker cues. So it is an excellent, using marker cues is a tool to give you precision, especially if you use multiple marker cues or location-specific marker cues, because we get anticipation, right? So the ideal order of events, if you use a marker cue, is that first you say the marker cue for the sake of this discussion, let's say it's yes, then you pause a tiny moment, and then you deliver the primary reinforcer. So let's say this is my reinforcer. The pause, I personally get the pause by means of blinking once consciously. So I would say, so I would have my hands in a neutral position, and then and this is where I would deliver the reinforcer here right to the camera. Let's say that's the dog's mouth. So for example, I would be yes. So the order of events is marker cue, blink once, move your treat hand or your toy hand or whatever it is that you are moving. And the reason this little pause is important is it gives you time to see if the dog understands the behavior. If you reach for your food, for example, at the same time that you're saying the marker cue, then you will not know if the dog has understood the marker cue. We are imagining here that you're using location-specific marker cues, right? So, for example, you want really pretty healing, and we know that reinforcing in position is helpful. And so you have one marker cue that lets the dog know that you will deliver the treat straight into their mouth. So you use that marker cue when the dog is in that perfect position, and you insert the treat straight into their mouth. And the dog in this situation should not be moving while you blink, because they know the treat is going to come to them. However, now let's think of a different dog. And this dog has a tendency to lag in healing. Maybe that dog just finds healing pretty boring, whatever, it's not that dog's thing. So you want to use a marker cue that counters that tendency. And because you and your dog have established this large vocabulary of marker cues, you also have a different marker cue that means I am going to throw the treat ahead of us. So in a straight line, right? So the dog is healing next to you, and you say, when the dog is ideally you will mark when the dog is in the perfect position. So maybe sometimes the dog lags, and sometimes, hold on, okay, sorry. My computer asked for my attention for a second. I'm back. So sometimes the dog lags, but sometimes the dog manages to stay in the perfect position. So ideally, you want to mark when the dog is in the perfect position, but because the dog has a tendency to lag and pretty much never forges, you will then mark with, let's say that marker cue for tossing the treat ahead of the both of you is chase. So dog is in perfect position, you say chase, blink once, and toss the treat ahead. And how will you know that your dog is not just watching your hand, but actually listening to the verbal marker cue? Well, that's this tiny pause where you blink once. You will see prediction behavior. You will see the dog, the moment you say chase, the dog is already starting to move forward. So you're countering the tendency to lag by means of your marker cue, by means of your treat placement, which is ahead of the both of you. And the marker cue already lets the dog know that the treat will be delivered ahead of you. So if you use that kind of reward every single time in your healing training, the tendency to lag should go down more and more and more. And similarly, you could also, of course, throw a toy. It depends on your dog, whatever your dog likes best. So do you need marker cues? No, but are they handy? Absolutely. And so, well, let me clarify this a little bit more. So they can come in handy, but only really if you do use that tiny little pause between your verbal, for example, verbal or visual or tactile marker cue and the delivery of the reinforcer. And the delivery of the reinforcer starts the moment you move your hand, for example, to get the reinforcer. If you do not have that tiny pause, if you do the two things simultaneously, your marker cue is probably not the verbal marker. It's going to be your hand moving into the treat pouch, the like crackling of the treat bag, or it is the movement of your hand that holds the toy. Because dogs are more in tune with us visually than they are in tune with us in terms of verbal communication. So unless you make sure that you first say the word with everything else still being neutral, then your dog's marker, the dog will always see what predicts the delivery of a reinforcer, but the dog will pick up on the first clue that a reinforcer is coming. And if that first clue is that you move your hand, then that is what the dog is going to learn. So if you use no verbal marker cue, but only your hand reaching in the pocket, that is just as good as if you use a marker cue simultaneously or after reaching for the treat. So using marker cues only makes sense if you actually make an effort to put in that tiny pause there and really work clear and clean with your dog. I use marker cues for some of my clients, but not for all of them. So it really depends on the person and the dog. And I think for some of them, it makes sense and it is fun for them. And for others, I do feel like it's just one more thing to think about and it's difficult. So especially if those people are not interested in competing in any sports thing, they just want nice pet dog behavior, there is zero reason to use any marker cues at all. In that case, we call the dog and we feed the dog from our hand and no marker cue. We ask the dog to sit, we feed the dog in position, we release the dog. No need for marker cues. Okay, next question that kind of builds on the previous one. How many marker cues should you have at the very least? 0. So you don't need any. So there is no you should have. I personally started out without any marker cues, just as pretty much everyone, because I am a decade older than I look, and using marker cues was not common when I first started training dogs, at least not in the tiny little Austrian town I grew up in. I'm sure there were other places where it was common. And that's the dachshund I trained to what is known as an IPO-BH in the US. So no marker cues needed for that. And we got our goal, even though that was a dachshund who would rather have done pretty much anything else than train for an IPO-BH. But, you know, That's the dog I had. And that's what I wanted to do with him. So you don't need any. But I do find it useful. So then at some point, I started learning about multiple marker. First, I learned about clicker training. I was like, oh, that's amazing. I use the clicker for everything. Then I started learning about multiple marker cues and location-specific marker cues. I think Shade was the person I learned most from, even though like at that point, there were various people all over the place in the dog training scene who used marker cues. All the Sarahs, for example, such as Sarah Brusky. And but I just learned a lot from Shade. Just a shout out to Shade Whitesell. And so at first I went way overboard. I was like, oh, this is amazing. This feels like we're sharing a new language. And I had like so many marker cues. I don't know how many, like 30 or something. And so I did that for a couple of years and then slowly reduced the number of marker cues because I didn't find having that many actually that useful. I think in the end, it really depends on who you are as a person and who your dog is, how much clarity they require, and how many different marker cues you are able to hold in your brain while also thinking about the training session you're doing. And for me, it turns out that's a limited number because I'm bad at multitasking. So now the marker cues that I use for all my dogs is, and that's for me now currently the minimum if I'm not training for a specific competition behavior, right? Anytime I'm training for competition behavior, I will add something else because it's fun and it is definitely helpful. But I have for all my dogs, and that'll be the case for any dog who goes through my program, for any dog who I foster, because I'm just so used to that vocabulary and I do find them useful. I have a marker cue that means come get the treat for my hand. That's a terminal marker cue. That means when I say this cue, the behavior you have been doing is over. Get out of position, come to my hand. I'm going to give you your treat. And that's a tongue click for me because using yes, personally, I don't like that as much because we use yes every day, all the time, all day long. So it's kind of meaningless. But a tongue click is something that we don't do that randomly, right? So I do that. I use that as a marker cue instead of using a clicker because I lose and forget clickers all the time. And I never lose and forget my tongue. So yay. I use a clicker too, specifically for free shaping. So anytime I have a clicker and I have the clicker out, my dogs know it's a shaping session. So it's also, the clicker is a contextual cue. And with the clicker in a free shaping session, I will feed in all kinds of different ways. But in terms of location-specific marker cues, we have the feed out of position terminal marker cue, which is, in my case, the tongue click, and like this. And then I have what Hannah Brannigan calls this a room service marker, which means the treat, like keep doing what you've been doing, and I will deliver the treat right into your mouth. For me, that is good. It is not an ideal word because I use the word quite a bit in everyday life. I hope I pronounce it differently because otherwise I'd be constantly lying to my dog, right? Because I'm saying good, good, good all over the place and no tangible reinforcer follows. But I'm so used to using that word now that I kind of feel like it would be hard for me to change the habit, and also I'm lazy. So that's what it is. I used to call this a keep going marker. So, but I've run into some confusion with people because other people used a word as a so-called keep going marker that did not predict a reinforcer. So I'm now using room service marker because that seems to have become the common name for delivering a treat into the dog's mouth and expecting the dog to keep holding their position. So that's good. Then I have a marker cue for a treat that I'm tossing, like in the example with the dog who is lagging in healing. And in my case, that cue is get it. And but I don't always toss straight ahead. I will toss wherever. So the prediction behavior I expect to see when I say get it is the dog looking at my hand. Unless I'm in like a pattern session where I'm always tossing in the same direction. So after 1 or 2 reps, the dog will know, okay, anytime I say get it in this very session, it's going to go over there. And that's where they will run to. And I have another, so my final treat-related marker cue is treats, which means I'm going to scatter a handful of treats all over the place. I like this one because it is a nice way for me to end a training session, bring down arousal, and yeah, it can also be useful if I ever need to distract a dog. If like, I don't know, there's an elephant walking past and I haven't taught my dog to not flip out when elephants walk past, so I can just say scatter, not scatter. I can just say treats and do a scatter, and my dog will be sniffing, busy finding all the treats. By the time they're done, the elephant has passed, and we can continue our walk. The dog did not learn anything about elephants in this session, right? I just didn't want to deal with the elephant because there rarely are any elephants, so it doesn't really make sense to set up a training session around elephants. If the thing that the dog was freaking out about was bikes or cars or other dogs, I would absolutely have to train this. I wouldn't just want to distract my dog because that's management. Management doesn't really get you anywhere in the long run, right? It just means you have to do the same thing forever. But the elephant is an exceptional stimulus that I don't expect to encounter twice in my dog's life unless we move somewhere where there are lots of elephants. So I don't need my dog to be able to cope with elephants passing in the street. Then I also have toy-specific marker cues. And I have tug, which means strike the tug toy that I'm presenting. Like if this was the tug toy, I would present it by my side usually. So the dog is not like crashing into my body, but I can catch, it's hard to show you. I can catch them like by my side. So I can move the tug toy around in any way I want until I say TUG. I expect my dog to not go for it. And so TUG, tug, is permission to strike the tug toy. And then the game is on and we are fighting. We're in a competitive game of tug. And I have chase. That means I will throw a toy for you to chase and return to me. That's a cooperative game where the dog will come back and return the toy to me. I can play chase, basically fetch, with tug toys, and I can play tug with like balls on a rope or frisbees. It is not the kind of toy that determines what we're going to do. It is the marker cue I'm using. And yeah, these are the only 2 marker cues related to toys that I use on a regular basis. But for example, when I taught grid competition healing, I used more location-specific toy marker cues. For example, I had one that specifically meant I will present it. I will present a tug toy or a ball basically under my armpit for you to jump up, because I wanted to encourage those looking up at the sky thoughts in her healing. Oh yeah, and for for dogs who tend to be grabby in healing, so like their butt goes out, I've used location-specific food and toy marker cues that mean the reinforcer is going to come. So if the dog is healing by my left, it's going to be basically presented behind me and to the right. So the dog has to spin away from me in order to get that reinforcer, and that will teach that behavior before I use that marker cue in my healing sequence, right? And that would get their butt closer to me. So I am helping them counter those crabby butt out thoughts. Okay, next question. What are the first marker cues you teach your puppy? All of the above. So if I get a puppy for at least a year, typically, like that's just typically, right? It could be different from one dog to the next, but typically for at least a year, that dog is not going to eat out of a bowl. I'll just use their daily food allowance to reinforce the things that I like in everyday life and to play food games with them. And I'll also I'll just deliver food in certain ways, and I will name all those ways of delivering food. And the puppy learns to follow a lure, for example. So as a puppy, the most important thing for me is like developing a shared language and learning how to learn. And one of the first things I need them to learn is, okay, we follow a lure, and then we only get or grab the treat or expect the treat after the marker cue. In my case, that would be the tongue click, right? So I can start luring the puppy a little bit, tongue click, release the treat. So when my dogs are puppies, I use mostly kibble because that is what allows me to have a gazillion little training sessions throughout the day. And every waking moment of your puppy, the puppy is learning like a sponge. And yeah, and when we're outside, or even if I don't have a lot of time, I will just go to a space where there is tall grass, and I'll say treats, and I'll scatter a handful of treats all over the place, and the puppy can like hunt all these treats down with their nose, and it's like this big nature snuffle mat. And when I train recalls, I will usually do a combination of tongue click. So I will call the puppy, tongue click, feed from my hand, and then I'll do get it and toss the treat away. And once the puppy is like eating that treat, I will call the puppy again, tongue click as they come to me, toss another treat away, maybe a different direction. So I can do like a star shape. Or if I have a corridor, it'll be like one direction and the other direction. Or if the corridor is too short to do two directions, it'll be just one direction. But so I can create loops where the puppy can run and practice a behavior along the way. And the puppy is, for example, in that recall session I just described, the puppy is learning two marker cues, the tongue click, which means food from my hand, and the get it treat, which means chase a thrown cookie, and they're learning their recall cue. So that's pretty cool. And what I like about also just doing marker cue loops, so I can lure the puppy into a sit, for example, and then eventually I can add the word sit and then lure the puppy into the sit, and then I can say good and feed one treat, and right away good and feed another treat, right away good and feed another treat before the puppy has time to get up. So I taught the puppy to follow a lure. I started introducing the verbal cue SIT, sit, to the puppy, and I started introducing the marker cue good, which is my room service marker, and which is going to mean stay in your position, hold your position. And by using these different words, I believe, and I have not read a study on this, so this is just me anecdotally or me projecting. Maybe it's not even true, but I get the impression that I want to get the impression, let's say this way. This is like truly the honest truth. I want to believe that this helps verbal discrimination in the dog. And later on, when I'm gonna, I don't know, let's say I'll compete and we'll have position changes at a distance, I like the skill of verbal discrimination is a conceptual skill. Like later, I need the dog to be able to discriminate between sit, down, and stand. But as a puppy, I can already use those marker cues for verbal discrimination, right? And I can look for those little prediction behaviors in between the saying the cue and the marker cue and delivering the treat to see if the puppy is anticipating what's going to happen based on what I just said. So I want the puppy to learn to like pay attention to what I'm saying. And that's a great way of starting to do that in a really low pressure, easy way, because all you do is like you hand out food basically. And the same with toys. So when we start playing with toys, the moment I get the puppy to bring back for example, the ball I tossed, I will start naming that behavior. And the moment I get the puppy to reliably tug on the tug that I have, I will start naming that behavior. So in play and in everyday life, I teach the puppies my entire marker cue vocabulary. And finally, our last question of today, and that I think is the most advanced one, does punishment also have marker cues or only reinforcement? That is a great question, and we do not talk about this enough. Yes, of course, punishment should have marker cues. For the very same reason that reinforcement has marker cues, right? We said it's like taking a picture of the perfect dog or like highlighting the word in the paragraph that is most important. And then we follow up with a reinforcer. And the dog knows exactly what that reinforcer is for, because it is the marker cue is also serves as a so-called bridge stimulus. It lets the dog know, like if I'm working on a send out and I use the marker cue when they're like way out away from me, I can use the marker cue when they're really far away from me, and then feed them when they come back to me, and they will know why they just got paid. If I didn't use a marker cue, they would not know that. So it pinpoints a very specific behavioral moment. And the same happens with a punishment marker. You need that specific marker for most, not for all, but for most effective punishment. You need to mark the moment that the dog did the thing, and then just as you follow your reinforcement marker cues up with a tangible reinforcer, you need to follow up those punishment marker cues with tangible punishment, because otherwise they become meaningless. They're empty threats, right? So you need to actually do the thing. And you could, of course, have different punishment markers, and just like you can have different reinforcement markers, you don't have to. Like, it really depends on what works for you and your dog. Since I don't use punishment a whole lot, I don't have a whole lot of punishment markers. I have a punishment marker that means never. So the word is literally never. And it means, but it does not specify what kind of punishment comes after, right? It's just something that in that situation makes sense and is undesirable for a dog. It could be picking the dog up and putting them in a timeout. It could be spraying water in their face. It could be just picking them up and holding them still for 5 seconds. It could be anything. But the marker is never. And I use that for things I never, ever, ever, ever want them to do. So it's not like a leave it, because a leave it means I don't want you to touch this thing right now, but I may let you touch it in like 10 seconds. For example, I can use a leave it when I'm working around toys on the ground or scattered food on the ground, and then release the dog who has successfully left it to go back and get those things. If I use never, it means this is something I want you to never, ever, 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 ever do in your life again. So if I, let's say I lived with my 120-year-old grandma, and I have a Saint Bernard who likes to jump up on people. And my grandma is fragile, and the Saint Bernard makes the 50-kilo Saint Bernard, or I don't know how heavy Saint Bernards are, but definitely heavy, makes the mistake of jumping up on grandma. I will most certainly say never the moment that those paws come up, and then I will implement whatever punishment I have handy at the moment. But I will actually try and make sure that it is a really, really strong punishment, because I do not want the dog to repeat this behavior even once. I want it to be a single event learning, because hopefully someone caught grandma as grandma was about to fall over, so grandma didn't break their hips. But next time we may not be that lucky, so I really don't want there to be a next time. So ideally, with punishment, I'm going for single event learning, at least when it comes to really, to things that are really, really important. Like, no, you cannot, if you're if you're a Chihuahua and you're 2 kilos, I don't care who you jump up on. But if you're a Saint Bernard, you're not going to jump up on a 120-year-old person ever. So I'll implement that, a punishment that really lets the dog know, okay, I better never do this again right away. And like with other things, I can use a lesser punishment, right? So a timeout is for most dogs not a big punisher. That's something I sometimes advise clients to do if their dog, for example, counter surfers, is a counter surfer. Like a timeout for, let's say, 30 seconds. You get created for 30 seconds, and then I let you out again, and you can try again, being a free dog in the house. So there are the counters, you're observing your dog. The moment the dog puts their paws on a counter, you say never or something else, whatever you want to use. And then you walk over to the dog, and the dog already knows what that means. It means, oh, you're gonna probably stuff me into the crate. So the dog walks around and tries to avoid you, but you said it. So the dog knows exactly what it is for. Doesn't matter how long you walk after the dog, you will eventually catch that dog, put them in their crate, close the door, start the 30-second timer, and then you let them out again. And if they put their paws up on the counter again, you will repeat. And like at the very most, this should be over in 3 days if you're consistent. If it was a harsher way of punishing the dog, then it should be a single event learning thing. But we don't really, like with counter surfing or something like that, that's not necessary. Like I feel like it's fine if you work on that 3 evenings in a row for half an hour each, and then you get your desired result. But yes, if you wanted to use a harsher punishment to get single event learning, that you could also do that, right? But I feel like it really is, it depends on the situation and on what's at stake and on how much time you have. But if you don't see the behavior go down relatively quickly, you need to change something. So if in 3 days I do not see a reduction in the behavior that I'm punishing, I'm clearly not punishing the behavior, because the definition of punishment is that the behavior will be displayed less often or disappear completely in the future, right? So if the behavior stays the same, then then it's not punishment. It's just a mild annoyance to the dog, and it's a waste of my time. So yes. So like give it 3 days or 3 sessions, and you should see a result. This was our last question, but let me add something else here. Because a follow-up question, nobody is on the call live with me here, but a follow-up question to this that I would expect is like, what about extinction bursts, right? So learning theory nerds know that when we ignore a behavior that has been reinforced in the past, so let's say the dog has been reinforced for jumping up on us with attention in the past, or for barking at us with attention, and then we just stop giving them attention when they do that, before the behavior disappears or goes away, we will see an extinction burst. And that means the dog will try harder, because the dog is used to this thing working. So they're like, why? Why are you not working? That doesn't make any sense. It's the same like when I'm used to my light switch working, right? So I'm switching on the light. When I use the light switch, I'm used to the lamp or the room becoming bright. And if that doesn't happen, I will try again, and I may like punch the light switch a little bit, or use it a little harder, or like like use it multiple times before I give up. That will be an extinction burst, because you're used to something working and it doesn't work. That is a feature of extinction, not a feature of punishment. With punishment, you see the behavior go down, or it is not punishment. You do not see an extinction burst with punishment. So extinction only happens if the behavior is being ignored. It has no consequence. Punishment, however, is a consequence. It's an undesirable consequence. So you wouldn't see an extinction burst for a behavior that got punished. Yeah. All right. I hope that answers the most burning questions. And if not, we're going to do a round 2. Have a nice evening, everyone. Bye.